Welcome to Stat Masters, where we teach you how to use Player Profiler to win at fantasy football and better evaluate players. My name is Aaron Stewart, and I'm a senior analyst for Player Profiler, and my co-host is Chris Buonagura, a fantasy intelligence network analyst for Player Profiler. Chris, who are we talking about today?
Today, I'm thinking we try to identify some potential league-winning running backs. Not your RB1 overall, but players who, when you look back at the season, you really wish you took them at ADP. And we're going to start with Alexander Mattison, the biggest riser of the last 5 days, ever since it became all but official that Dalvin Cook is out of town. Going to be a post-June 1st cut, and based on the Vikings salary situation and the moves they've made this offseason, there's absolutely no reason to think that they bring anyone else significant in. There are no major free agents available. It's basically just Zeke and Fournette, and it's hard to see them overpaying either of those guys as they gear up for a big upcoming Justin Jefferson contract with their annual extensions of Kirk Cousins. That's a pretty big strain to the wallet. So Alexander Mattison has officially approached the point where he becomes almost a new version of James Conner, where a couple of years ago, James Conner was the backup to Le'Veon Bell for one season in Pittsburgh, and Le'Veon Bell the next season had his famous holdout, didn't play, and everyone goes, oh, you can't just give James Conner Le'Veon Bell's workload and expect him to be good at fantasy football. Well, it turns out you can. He was the RB7 in PPR points per game that season with 215 carries, 973 total yards, 55 receptions for about 500 receiving yards, and 13 total touchdowns. Now, he didn't really do anything in his rookie season. He did essentially nothing. But you see the sophomore year, and we look at James Conner's metrics that sophomore year, plenty of opportunity and volume. And his advanced stats, he was actually fairly efficient. 9 yards per reception. He ran 249 routes. His route participation was top 13. His running efficiency was just okay. He was 13th in evaded tackles and 11th in breakaway run rate, which is very good. But nothing on this profile is that of an elite RB1, more so a high upside RB2. But the thing about James Conner is every single time in the last 5 years he's been given high volume, he's produced with it. He's never been the most efficient guy, yards per carry over 4.5, never once. But he produces with volume. He's a middle of the pack running back. And when you're able to produce with volume, if you're given volume, you'll be good for fantasy football. So you have Alexander Mattison. Can he be that plug and play James Conner for Dalvin Cook, who's been one of the best running backs we've seen in the last 5 years? Truly special player and a fantasy football leader. So we look, Mattison's been in the league now for 4 years, far more than James Conner's single season. And in those 4 years, he's done very little, not much to look at. And his yards per carry, again, pretty much never over 4.5. And there's nothing on the profile to look at. 2021 was the season where he saw the most work by far. And you look at his metrics from 2021, there's just nothing here. There's no metric that really eclipses the top 40, even the top 30. You can say yards created per touch was number 29, but that is what it is. There's no indicator that this is an efficient player. So how can you be in on him to simply carry the torch for Dalvin Cook? So in this case, I would look at the game log, and you look at 2021, and in the few games Cook missed and Mattison was given volume, we look at week 3, 67% snaps, 26 carries, 17 routes, 8 targets on 17 routes. That's basically a 50% targets per route run, 6 receptions, 171 total yards. Right, 5 red zone carries, no touchdowns, but number 7 in points in fantasy points that week among running backs. Week 5, same deal, does find the end zone, number 6, and then you look, and basically every time he's given the ball, week 13, he correlates it to fantasy points, number 8. Week 16, he doesn't get quite as much work, only 13 carries and 4 targets, and then he's 13th. His fantasy finish basically always correlates with the production he's given. So is this, some elite RB1? Is this Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb? Of course not. But James Conner was never efficient. Last season, Josh Jacobs was not efficient. We looked at Josh Jacobs about a month ago, and his efficiency was very boring, but the volume was great. If you told me for sure that the Minnesota Vikings are going to basically start Mattison, and the only way they bring in a new running back is if he gets hurt and it's his job to lose, and he's looking at 250 carries and 60 targets this year. I would take him as early as round 5. I would take him as early as RB20. You look at running backs on this list, he goes as high as maybe just behind Joe Mixon, and I would want him still before Dameon Pierce. You certainly take him over Pacheco and Akers and Rashad White and James Conner and these other guys that you elevate because of simply volume, because he's 25, which is insane. He's still very young. He's right at the age apex. He's not necessarily athletic, but again, neither is James Conner. It's actually the same athleticism. He has the requisite size, 5'11", 221, and he's not going to be that expensive. He has risen in value, but you can take him even higher. James Conner was a value as a 6th-round pick that sophomore season. I remember because I passed on him, and I took holdout Le'Veon Bell in the 2nd round thinking he'll never actually hold out, and I lost my fantasy league that year, specifically because of that. I think there's a lot of reason to like an Alexander Mattison.
And with Mattison, you mentioned that when he gets volume, he's productive. I looked at the last 4 games that Dalvin Cook missed. Alexander Mattison was the guy. His averages, and this is from the 2021 and 2022 seasons, it's a small sample size, but he averaged 23.5 carries, 5 red zone carries per game. He ran 18.8 routes per game, averaged 5.3 targets per game. The opportunities, that's almost 29 opportunities in the backfield that he averaged. You brought up Josh Jacobs, and I know it's absurd, right, to say Josh Jacobs with a guy like Alexander Mattison that 4 years, we haven't really seen it. It's because he's played behind Dalvin Cook. But that opportunity share is Josh Jacobs-esque. It's crazy. And one last stat that you need to know about this Vikings backfield is look at the guys behind Mattison. Assuming Dalvin Cook's gone, and he will be gone, the rest of the backfield has combined for a career 34 touches, total touches. Or no, that's not even touches. That's just opportunities. That's targets and carries. 34 opportunities. Alexander Mattison is going to feast in this backfield once Dalvin Cook gets cut. And for people that are holding out hope, oh, but they haven't moved him yet. We're past the draft. No, they're waiting to cut him after June 1st. That's going to happen. There's not going to be a trade. He's too expensive. His salary is too expensive for someone to trade. He will get cut. It will be Madison's backfield.
Yeah, and Mattison was an 11th round pick about a month ago. He's now already jumped to ADP of 87 overall. It was literally 91 yesterday. His ADP moves by the hour. He's up to RB28. He goes typically in the 8th round. I'm not joking when I say you can take him as early as the 6th round. There's no need to do it yet, but this is a player you can take a spot or two ahead of ADP, and I'm certainly taking him before Akers and White. And I expect him to settle somewhere in this Miles Sanders or the Joe Mixon range. And that's a very comfortable place to take Alexander Mattison on the assumption he gets the volume. Now, a player who's falling at a rate as fast as Mattison is climbing is Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker, a couple of weeks ago, before the draft, was a round 2 pick. He was going at the 2-3 turn, but honestly, he almost never hit round 3. He was a mid to late 2nd round pick. And me and Aaron on this show in the past, very early on in this show's life, told you that we didn't like that. We didn't have him that late in our personal rankings when we went through our running back rankings. We had him much lower because it made sense. Ken Walker was not a 2nd round pick running back. And when they did draft Zach Charbonnet and he started to fall, he now falls to where he appropriately should be drafted. And he has fallen now to a round 4-5 turn. So he's dropped 2 full rounds. And I've seen Kenneth Walker fall. I saw him go at pick 60 today. That's mid to late 5th round. And in the 5th round, you do have to like Kenneth Walker. He now becomes a value because he is still very talented. He just wasn't talented enough for a 2nd round pick. And I like Charbonnet also. But Kenneth Walker is 5'9", 211 with absolutely elite athleticism. You go back to the rookie profile, and we always knew he was not going to catch passes, but he had that elite 1,600-yard season with 19 touchdowns. And then you look at what Walker did last season, and he didn't necessarily play the whole year. Rashad Penny started it off, and he did miss a few games, but he certainly did well with the opportunity given, and he showed that he was an explosive runner. Now, he was number 3 in breakaway runs and number 8 in breakaway run rate, number 10 in evaded tackles, and number 12 in juke rate. So he does show a home run hitting ability, but yards per touch was number 29 at 4.8, and true yards per carry was low. Meanwhile, his yards created and yards created per touch were higher. So this is a guy who got a lot of low calorie runs and didn't necessarily exceed with the 2 yards and a cloud of dust type runs. But on the breakaway runs and the explosive playmaking, this is an early down bell cow who has room for a satellite back, the same way Nick Chubb did for the last couple of years with Kareem Hunt. And Nick Chubb was always pushed into the 3rd round, and he always paid off as a back end RB1, despite Hunt also giving you fantasy production. And it's not crazy to think you get a similar from these two players this year. If you want to look at Zach Charbonnet, this is also a player to like. It's kind of a shame they have to play in the same backfield, but he's 6'0", 214 with decent athleticism, best comparable to DeMarco Murray. And you look at what he did in college, and he does have that Kareem Hunt-esque profile of can obviously handle work on the ground, but also excels through the air. Now, he did it at UCLA. It's not necessarily the SEC, and his production was very good, but it wasn't necessarily Jonathan Taylor. This is a player to like, and a player who goes around pick 100, who can also find upside with Kenneth Walker there. But Kenneth Walker reminds me a lot of Doug Martin. Doug Martin, who was 5'9", 223 with okay athleticism, didn't have the athleticism of Ken Walker, and a guy who certainly flashed in fantasy football. Back in Doug Martin's day, he had a lot of bad seasons, right? RB46, RB56, but he also had good seasons, RB2 and RB8, right? And then you look at the way he played, very few receptions. With the 2 seasons he did well, he actually got good receptions, had good touchdown equity, and got a lot of carries. Now, the other seasons he missed games, but whenever he was healthy, he was a bowling ball, man. And then you look at something like, maybe that 2015 season, how his efficiency metrics, right? Not necessarily efficient as a receiver. Your 8.2 yards per reception is good, but it's not necessarily elite. But evaded tackles were good. We don't have data on a lot of on everything, but his juke rate was number 8. His evaded tackles was number 2. Yards per touch was 17. True yards per carry was number 13. He was what we're essentially going to expect out of Kenneth Walker. It's going to be hard to peg down year to year exactly what you get out of Walker, because you're going to be relying on touchdown variance and reception variance. So we'll see how much Charbonnet does cut in. But at this point in the 5th round, he falls to RB18, RB19. I mean, just give me Walker. He still has the home run upside. And as he falls, he does become a nice value for a discount RB2 or a 0 RB RB1.
And with Kenneth Walker, it's always about perception. We don't hate players, we hate ADPs, right? Kenneth Walker, when he was going 1st round, 2nd round in best ball drafts, early in drafts, right? Like, the profile was not the profile of a running back you take in the 1st round. Coming into the NFL, what was the one knock on Kenneth Walker? Oh, he doesn't catch passes. And guess what? He struggled as a rookie. Yes, he had 35 targets. It was number 34 amongst running backs. Yes, he caught 27 passes, number 33. The receiving yards, though, was number 42 amongst running backs as a rookie. Also, when you look at running backs last season that had 50 plus carries, you scroll down to the bottom of his profile there. There's stuffed runs, but there's also a stuffed run rate. He was number 4 in stuffed run rate. He had trouble really consistently getting through the hole. And JJ Zachariason, he nailed it on his podcast recently of talking about why the Seattle Seahawks would bring in a guy like Zach Charbonnet. Yes, the 2nd round draft capital for that running back is a little high for a team that just drafted Kenneth Walker in the 2nd round, but Zach Charbonnet succeeded in the areas that Kenneth Walker struggled. Walker was never a perfect prospect. He has things he does really well. He's a home run hitter. It's great. We always think of the big plays, but he was a flawed player last season. Really, there wasn't a whole lot of great games. There's like 2 or 3 games that really stand out. It was mind-boggling how far up in ADP he got pushed because of a couple of games, and it was all like middle of the season, decent little stretch, but started to fade, right? Like, you should have expected them to do something in that backfield because Walker was not the answer. But now at his price, as Chris mentioned, 4th round, 5th round, that's fine. That's perfect place to take a home run hitter. He still has big play potential. He can still be a cheaper Nick Chubb. That's totally fine. But hey, Nick Chubb, we weren't taking 1st round early in the best ball drafts for this year. So Kenneth Walker was an easy fade. But now, with his price, he could be a target.
Yeah, I'm not going out of my way for Ken Walker, but he's not toxic. He's not undraftable now. If he works into your team, your approach, and your build, then yes, draft Kenneth Walker. Don't feel like you can't draft him at all, but I'm not going out of my way for him. Someone who I am going out of my way for, borderline drafting at all costs, is Rhamondre Stevenson, a player who, entering this offseason, I actually did not like. I wasn't drafting him a lot in pre-draft best ball tournaments. It felt like a bad pick to me. And then as I looked at it more and I thought on it more, I realized that the reasons I was fading him were fallacious and fear-based. And you look at his profile, he has everything you like that Kenneth Walker gave you, plus 20 pounds, plus receiving chops. And it's crazy. He's 5'11", 231. Now, he's not a crazy athlete, but we have seen running backs succeed that don't have the athletic metrics, and he's already succeeded. So a lot of the guessing game is out. And he was a 4th round pick, but it doesn't really matter at this point because of what he's done. So the rookie season in 12 games, the 133 rushes for 600 yards, some receptions, and the number 33rd overall finish in fantasy points per game. That is significant because Bill Belichick does not put rookies on the field. Go look up rookie production at any position, especially running back, through the last 10 years on the Patriots. Rookies don't even sniff the field. The fact that Stevenson was part of the game plan is already very telling. And then last season, Damian Harris did miss some time, but when Damian Harris came back from injury, he was perfectly healthy, and Belichick just still kept giving it to Stevenson. You would have expected it to revert a bit, but it really didn't. The 210 rush attempts for the 1,000-yard season, the 5 yards per carry, 69 receptions for 400 yards and 6 touchdowns. Stevenson underperformed in the touchdown category. The Patriots kind of rock bottom last season. They're going to regress positively in touchdowns. So will Stevenson. What happens when Stevenson eclipses 13, 14 total touchdowns? Of course he can. And he's going to improve as long as he stays healthy. You look at it, 89 targets. 89 targets is Austin Eckler levels of targets. That is an absurd number for a running back who is also looking at 210 carries, right? And he produced on it. All of the advanced receiving. Now, his yards per reception was bad. I'll give you that. But he's also 230 pounds. And this was an unproductive offense with no threat of a receiving game. And he still participated in routes, though, ran routes, got a target share, had a good catch rate, didn't drop the ball. I mean, this is a guy who's involved. And unless they have some elite James White, even if he gets less targets, 20, 30 less targets that go to Pierre Strong, he can improve his running stats and he'll improve his touchdown equity. He was number 10 in PPR points per game last year. He's currently drafted as RB11. That's essentially his floor now, right? And then you look at advanced, 3rd in juke rate, 13th in breakaway run rate, 6th in breakaway runs, 3rd in evaded tackles, yards created, yards per touch, true yards per carry, yards created per touch, all good, right? This is a player who's proven it. And the one thing people will say why you don't draft Rhamondre Stevenson is, the history of Bill Belichick and using committees, the history of Bill Belichick and X and Y and Z. Anytime you fade a stud because of a history of coaching tendency X, it's always wrong. Because Bill Belichick has never had a Rhamondre Stevenson, at least not in the last 5 years, not in recent memory, right? And Bill Belichick has already shown us now through 2 seasons that Stevenson ascends his tendencies. What else do you want? He already overcame the coaching tendencies. What else do you want? Christian McCaffrey went to San Francisco last year. Oh, the Kyle Shanahan coaching tendencies. Go look at Christian McCaffrey's box score last year's. Once someone good comes to town, throw your tendencies right out the window. I love Rhamondre Stevenson to finish as a RB1 again, if healthy through 17 games, with potential top 5 upside, with even potential RB1 overall upside.
And with Rhamondre too, it's okay to have missed on him last year, right? Bill Belichick had to make Rhamondre Stevenson earn his role because at the start of the season, Stevenson didn't even have the pass catching role. For week 1, before he went down with an injury, it was Ty Montgomery. Ty Montgomery only played game 1. When he went down with an injury, it was Rhamondre Stevenson's time to shine. You could see an immediate jump in his routes from week 1 to week 2. And you know what he did? He freaking took that opportunity, clearly impressed Bill Belichick, and earned that pass catching role and then some. Damian Harris, as you mentioned, when he went down, Rhamondre Stevenson at that point had asserted himself. And looking at this depth chart as well, they lost Damian Harris to Buffalo. They didn't draft anyone. They signed James Robinson, but the beat reporters, there's some beat reporters doing 53-man roster projections. James Robinson's not a lock, right? So you really have Pierre Strong, Kevin Harris, Ty Montgomery is back, but he's 31 years old. When you're talking about a guy that has RB1 upside, it's Rhamondre Stevenson. And I look back at his rookie season too. He was number 4 in juke rate, number 20 in breakaway run rate. He didn't get enough volume for it to really matter too much, but he showed the ability to be elusive and break long runs. And then when he got volume this past season, it remained the same essentially. Number 3 in juke rate, number 13 in breakaway run rate. Same with his receiving ability. It was limited as a rookie, but he had very impressive yards per route run and yards per reception. And then what happens this past season? They give him volume, and he was top 8 in targets, receiving yards, receptions, routes run, target share. He's a 3-down running back. He can do it all. He's got size, pass catching ability. The only thing we haven't seen is a lot of touchdowns, and you mentioned, at any point, that can change. When the Patriots offense gets better, Stevenson's going to have more red zone opportunities. Don't fade Rhamondre Stevenson. There's no reason to fade Stevenson. It's okay to even, dare I say, reach on him in drafts. His ADP overall is what? Around pick 30, I think last time I saw.
He's pick 30. Great. I've seen him go at the 2-3 turn. I've seen him fall to pick 38. He goes mid to late 3rd round. He still goes after Hall and Jacobs a lot. He sometimes goes before Henry. I've never seen him go before Pollard. You have range on Stevenson. You don't have to reach in the 2nd round, but if you pick with anywhere from picks 1 to 8, you can draft hoping he falls to you at the 301 to 308. He's a very good player, and like you said, Aaron, there's no competition here. I like Pierre Strong as a last round flyer to be the change of pace back with a slight satellite role. James Robinson is done. I mean, he tore his Achilles. That's a career-ending injury. He was a healthy scratch to Zonovan Knight last year. We're going to see Cam Akers disappoint this year, as we saw Deontay Foreman do for years. The Achilles tear destroys running backs. You got to just live with it. It's unfortunate. I like Pierre Strong, but he's not stopping Stevenson. And Kevin Harris is just there. He's a New England Patriot. Good for him. And another running back, right, who doesn't have a lot of competition right now is Miles Sanders. And this is a name that I never thought in 1,000 years would come out of my mouth in a positive way, but it very much is. And Miles Sanders has found his way into my heart. Just recently, just this morning, I finally came around, and I have not been drafting Miles Sanders up to this point. I drafted him in February, just after the Super Bowl, when he was a 10th round pick. And then once he shot into the 6th round, I stopped drafting him, but I shouldn't have. There's a lot of reason to think Miles Sanders can succeed this season in Carolina. It's mostly theoretical, but it makes sense. So first, we'll look at the production. He was very misused in Philadelphia the last 3 seasons, especially last year with the 260 rush attempts. Now, he did well with it for 1,200 yards and 11 total touchdowns, But to not eclipse 30 receptions at all in the last 3 years after having 50 receptions as a rookie and 500 receiving yards is frankly absurd. This stat line from the rookie season, the 180 rushes for short of 1,000 yards and the 50 receptions for 500 yards, that is the type of player Miles Sanders should be. A lighter version of Alvin Kamara, that type of workload. And you could argue the receptions should have grown as the seasons went on. And, Philly had a lot going on. You went from Carson Wentz to, Jalen Hurts, and a lot of change in philosophy, change in coach, a lot of change, a lot of committees, this and that. You look back to 2019. Now, I can already tell you, you look back the last 3 years, you're not really going to see anything that jumps off the page from efficiency, right? But you look at that rookie season, and you see 10.2 yards per reception, number 4 in the NFL. That's nearly Christian McCaffrey levels of yards per reception. Now, obviously, he's not Christian McCaffrey, but it's to tell you the type of company a number like that sits in, right? 8th in routes run, 14th in route participation. He earned 63 targets, and he caught 50 of them. That's very good for a running back, right? And he moves on. His juke rate is good. His evaded tackles are good. He's not breaking away runs, but again, this isn't a running guy. Yards per touch is good. And he now goes to a Carolina Panthers team that spent significant money on him. And everyone who listens to the show knows that I like Bryce Young. But much like Kyler Murray and much like Russell Wilson, if you look at the heat maps for Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson the last 5 years, these guys definitively struggle to throw it over the middle of the field. As much as it's a joke on their height, it is true. Now, these guys have succeeded despite that, but Bryce Young will struggle to throw over the middle of the field because he is shorter than his offensive line. It's not a joke. It's just factual. Now, I think Bryce Young is talented, but how is Carolina going to score fantasy points this year? I'm sorry. How are they going to score real NFL points? How are they going to move the football? They don't really have anyone that specializes over the middle of the field. There's no big body tight end. Adam Thielen's a very nice short yardage route runner, but he's very old. He'll earn 110 targets. DJ Chark's going to just be running random 9 and go routes and occasionally catching one on an off-script play. And then you have a second round overdrafted Jonathan Bingo, a bust in Terrace Marshall, and a fringe player I like in Laviska Shenault. But Shenault, he's a guy that just kind of gets an end around here and there. He's not a huge threat. You look at the backfield. I like Chuba Hubbard, even though he disappointed last year, but he profiles as more of a slasher, more of an early down runner, where Miles Sanders is your receiving back. Why can't the offensive game plan this year for Carolina just be dump the ball to the running back? I mean, that's going to be a really easy way for them to circumvent Bryce Young's weaknesses and move the ball. I feel like we're going to have a situation similar to rookie year James Robinson, who played for Gardner Minshew on the Jaguars with one of the worst O-lines in football on a trash offense with no talent. And the only way they moved the ball was Gardner Minshew being scrappy and James Robinson getting 100 targets. Why can't Miles Sanders get 100 targets? It sounds absurd, but realistically, it's not. The coaches came out, and the two things they've said, and we don't take coach speak too highly, but they said before the draft that they want 3 running backs. They like a committee. And then they said after signing Miles Sanders that they want to try to return him to his rookie season receiving role. And paired with Chuba Hubbard, it's actually a nice compliment, 1-2. And Miles Sanders is going to get the high quality stuff. Now, the touchdown equity is a little limited, but if he catches 70 passes in any type of half PPR or full PPR format, he's currently a 5th round pick. He's a little pricey, certainly not cheap. His ADP is 55, and there's people that have come to this conclusion well before I have, so he really doesn't slip past ADP a lot. You're probably not going to get him in the 6th round, but honestly, if your team needs a running back and he's your 1st or 2nd running back and you've already gotten receivers, Miles Sanders in the 5th round is not a very good, but a good pick. It's not bad. You can feel confident because in this scenario where the Panthers choose to just dump it down with Bryce Young because he's small, Miles Sanders just gets every target. And there's no one else on this team. I like Raheem Blackshear, but he's just a fringe rotational back. It's really just Miles Sanders.
And in this backfield too, or really the Carolina Panthers offense, we spend so much time going, who's the alpha receiver? Who's the guy that's going to get targets? The answer is right there in their backfield. And I love how you mentioned that Chuba Hubbard would be the slasher. You know who his best comparable player is, right? On Player Profiler, Chuba Hubbard's best comparable player is Tevin Coleman. And I got the wheels turning there as like, if he plays the Tevin Coleman role in an offense, I guess that makes Miles Sanders in that 50 reception rookie season as the Devontae Freeman in this backfield. There's some untapped upside, which is crazy to say about a guy coming off an RB 21 season in points per game in PPR. Like, my mind is blown that he finished that well in PPR despite catching 20 passes for 78 yards this past season with Philadelphia. He was a non-factor in the receiving game, and he finished pretty well, respectfully. And his ADP is RB 17 this year. It's right around where he finished. And I go, there is some untapped potential in 2023 with Miles Sanders. He's a fun 5th round pick. It feels disgusting because people remember the playoff run the Eagles had, where Kenneth Gainwell was producing better in fantasy than Miles Sanders. But the Eagles just were utilizing Sanders wrong. Like, it's laughably bad how they utilize Sanders. But going to Carolina, where, reminder, they gave him a 4-year, $25 million contract. He's there for a minimum of 2 seasons. They're going to utilize him. And Bryce Young, in college, he had this running back he played with his final season named Jahmyr Gibbs, who caught 44 passes. Not saying Sanders is the same pass catcher as Gibbs, but Bryce Young targets his running backs, right? In that backfield, Sanders is the most prolific pass catcher in that backfield. Raheem Blackshear right now is just a project. He may not even get on the field. So Miles Sanders, going back to his rookie season production in the passing game, that is in this range of outcomes.
Yeah, and the key here is that Miles Sanders is 26 years old. That is right at the age apex. 26 is typically when you see a lot of players give you their best fantasy season, and then it's all downhill from there, even if it's incremental, especially for non-elite guys, right? Eckler, McCaffrey, they keep it going past 26. Not really Miles Sanders. I'm not saying drop everything and acquire him in Dynasty, right? But for this season in best ball in redraft, there is a huge rookie season James Robinson vibe going on here. I like him being Devontae Freeman to Chuba Hubbard's Tevin Coleman that we had for years in Atlanta, where you did get production out of both of them in fantasy. And this is a player to still like. His athleticism is pretty good. And there's a reason he was miscast in Philly, right? Your best rusher is Jalen Hurts. You have Devontae Smith for short yardage. You have an elite tight end, right? You have a Kenneth Gainwell. Carolina's Devontae Smith is 35 years old. They have no tight end. Their best rusher is still arguably Miles Sanders, right? Chuba Hubbard's probably a little better, but he hasn't really done much. And there is no Kenneth Gainwell. So why? Like, who else is going to come? And it's Carolina. They're not going to make some crazy veteran signing or trade at this point, right? This is a building team. This is the only way they move the ball down the field, and this production down the field is what's going to move your fantasy team to wins week in and week out and move you to advancing to the finals in underdog. For a 5th round pick that is invaluable, I'm happy to spend it. I'll draft wide receivers somewhere else. I'll happily pass on Chris Godwin, who I love, for 100 targets to Miles Sanders. And that's it. We got Alexander Mattison, Miles Sanders, Rhamondre Stevenson. Shove them onto your rosters. Kenneth Walker, if he happens to be there and you want him to flirt with some of your exposure, sure. Why not? He's not completely toxic. And those are the guys. And I mean, also Tony Pollard, but we've spoken about him before. Aaron, any last words?
I've got nothing to add to those 4 guys. It is important to remember ADP over players. And that's going to do it for this episode of Stat Masters. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you give this video a like. Comment below some of the things that you liked, dislike. We'll have some discussions with you. And also, don't forget to join our Discord server on Player Profiler. You can go to playerprofiler.com/chat. The reason why you do that is we record the show live on Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern. We have people watching the show, and after the show, we take questions. We have bonus content for the people that support us on Discord. So make sure to go to playerprofiler.com/chat and join the Player Profiler Discord. And on that note, from Aaron and from Chris, We bid you adieu until next time.
Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out playerprofiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.